The year 1990 stands out as one of the most important years in professional wrestling history. It was a time when the World Wrestling Federation tried to do something it had never done before. The company wanted to move away from its biggest star and hand the torch to someone new. This was not a small task. Hulk Hogan had been the face of wrestling since 1984, dominating the main event scene for 6 years. His name was known in every household across America. But Vince McMahon knew that nothing lasts forever. He understood that fans might grow tired of seeing the same hero win time after time. He also worried about what would happen if Hogan left to make movies or got hurt. These fears pushed him to look for the next big thing. And he thought he had found it in a man who ran to the ring like a wild animal and shook the ropes like his life depended on it. That man was the Ultimate Warrior. What followed was a year full of big moments and hard lessons. The World Wrestling Federation learned that making a new star is not as simple as putting a belt around someone's waist. They found out that fans do not always follow the path you set for them. And by the end of the year, they were forced to go back to what they knew best. But along the way, they also planted seeds that would grow into something amazing. A dead man walked through the curtain for the first time. A tag team from Japan made waves. And the mid-card started to fill with future main eventers who would carry the company for years to come. This is the story of WWF in 1990. It is a tale of hope, failure, and unexpected success. To understand 1990, we need to look at what came before it. The 1980s had been very good to Vince McMahon and his wrestling empire. He had taken a business that was split into many small territories and turned it into a national show. He did this by putting all his chips on one man, Hulk Hogan. The Hulkster, as fans called him, was not the best technical wrestler. He did not know 100 holds. He could not flip through the air like a gymnast. But he had something that money cannot buy. He had a connection with the crowd that felt real and true. Around Hogan, McMahon built a cast of colorful characters. There was Rowdy Roddy Piper, the loudmouth villain who could make fans hate him with just a few words. Randy Savage brought an intensity that made every match feel like life or death. Andre the Giant was a mountain of a man who seemed to come from another world. Together, these men and many others created a product that crossed over from wrestling into pop culture. MTV showed their matches. Movie stars appeared at their events. Suddenly, wrestling was not just for die-hard fans anymore. It was for everyone. The peak of this era came in 1989 when the mega powers exploded. For months, Hogan and Savage had been the best of friends. They called themselves the Mega Powers and fought side by side against all who challenged them. But jealousy began to creep in. Savage thought Hogan was getting too close to his manager, Miss Elizabeth. The tension built and built until it finally burst on the Main Event 2 in February 1989, when Savage attacked Hogan backstage. This led to WrestleMania V, where, in a match that told a perfect story, the two former friends fought for the world title. Hogan won, but the real victory was in how the whole thing played out. It showed that wrestling could be more than just good guys beating bad guys. It could have layers and depth. But after reaching such a high point, where do you go next? This was the question McMahon faced as 1990 began. He had already done the biggest storyline he could think of. His champion had dominated the main event scene since 1984. The fans were still loyal, but for how long? History taught him that nothing stays fresh forever. If he wanted to keep growing, he needed to take a risk. He needed to try something new. The wrestling landscape of the late 1980s also included competition. The National Wrestling Alliance still existed, with various territories under its banner. Jim Crockett Promotions, which would soon become WCW, was putting on shows that appealed to fans who wanted a different style. These companies had stars of their own, like Ric Flair and Sting, who could have been huge in the WWE. But for now, McMahon was focused on his own roster. He believed he had everything he needed to create the next era of wrestling greatness. He just needed to find the right man to lead it. The man McMahon picked to be his next big star could not have been more different from Hulk Hogan. Where Hogan was calm and cool, the Ultimate Warrior was chaos given human form. He did not walk to the ring. He sprinted like something was chasing him. He did not cut normal promos where he talked about his opponent. Instead, he shouted about warriors and battles and cosmic forces that made no sense but somehow felt exciting. His face was covered in paint. His body was huge with muscles. When he grabbed the ring ropes and shook them, the whole arena seemed to shake with him. The Warrior had already made a name for himself as the Intercontinental Champion. This was the second most important belt in the company, and he had held it with pride. His matches were not technical masterpieces, but they were full of energy. Fans, especially young ones, loved his style. They bought his merchandise. They copied his face paint. They ran around their backyards pretending to shake invisible ropes. McMahon saw all of this and knew he had something special. The plan formed in his mind. He would have Hogan and the Warrior face off at WrestleMania VI. But this would not be a typical good guy versus bad guy match. No, this time both men would stay as heroes. The fans would have to choose which one they wanted to win. It was a bold idea. The WWE had never tried anything like it before. There was real fear that if both men stayed heroic, the crowd would not know who to cheer for. The whole thing could fall flat. To test the waters, they set up a moment at the Royal Rumble in January. During the big Battle Royal match, Hogan and the Warrior came face to face in the ring. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. The crowd went wild. The sound in the building was deafening. It was clear that fans were hungry to see these two titans collide. That reaction was all the proof McMahon needed. The match was on. What made this matchup so special was that it had never been tried before. In wrestling, the hero always fights the villain. That is how the story works. Good versus evil. Light versus dark. The audience knows who to support because the roles are clear. But what happens when you have two heroes? What happens when both men are loved equally? McMahon was betting that fans could handle the choice. He was betting that the moment would be bigger than any traditional story could create. It was a gamble that would define the year. The 1990 Royal Rumble took place on January 21st and set the stage for the year ahead. The main attraction was the Rumble match itself, where 30 men entered the ring one by one and fought until only one was left standing. But this year, the match was about more than just winning. It was about planting the seed for WrestleMania. When Hogan and the Warrior met in that ring, the moment was electric. They squared off, neither one backing down. Then, the Warrior was thrown out, and some said it was because of Hogan. Whether this was done on purpose or by accident did not matter. What mattered was that the fans now had a reason to believe these two would fight. The story had begun. Other parts of the night were notable too. The $1 Million Man entered the match at number 1 and lasted for nearly 45 minutes. This was a record that would stand for years. He showed amazing stamina and skill to survive that long with everyone gunning for him. Mr. Perfect also put on a strong showing. Many expected him to win the whole thing, and he came very close before Hogan threw him out at the end. Behind the scenes, there was some drama around this finish. Word got out later that Mr. Perfect had been set to win the Rumble, but Hogan used his power backstage to change the result. This was not the first time Hogan had done something like this, and it would not be the last. But at the time, fans knew nothing about these politics. They just saw their hero standing tall at the end, his hand raised high, and they cheered like they always did. The undercard of the show was not as strong. Matches like Brutus Beefcake versus The Genius failed to get the crowd excited. Greg Valentine and Ronnie Garvin had a match that felt like it belonged in a smaller venue. This was a common problem for WWE pay-per-views at the time. The main event was always strong, but the rest of the card often felt like filler. Still, fans left the Rumble with one thing on their minds: Hogan versus Warrior. That was all that mattered. The Royal Rumble match itself had other interesting moments beyond the Hogan and Warrior stare-down. Demolition, the tag team champions, made a strong showing. Akeem and the Big Boss Man represented the large men that McMahon loved to push. Jim Duggan, a crowd favorite, got his usual reaction when he came out waving the American flag. The match was a showcase for the entire roster, letting each man have his moment before the bigger stars took center stage. As winter turned to spring, the WWE built toward its biggest show of the year. WrestleMania VI would be held in Toronto, Canada, at the massive Sky Dome. This was a statement. The company was so confident in this show that they booked one of the biggest venues in North America. They needed to fill over 60,000 seats. The pressure was on. In February, there was one last test of Hogan's reign. On February 23rd, at the Main Event 3, he defended his title against Randy Savage. This match had an interesting backstory. Originally, Mike Tyson was supposed to be the special guest referee. This would have been huge news as Tyson was one of the most famous athletes in the world. But then something strange happened. Just 12 days before the match, on February 11th, Tyson lost his heavyweight boxing title to Buster Douglas in one of the biggest upsets in sports history. Suddenly, having Tyson as the ref did not seem like such a good idea. So the WWE scrambled and brought in Douglas instead, signing him at the Buffalo airport right when he returned from Tokyo. The match itself was good, but the result was never in doubt. Hogan won and kept his title, clearing the way for the showdown with the Warrior. Now there was nothing standing between these two titans and their date with destiny. Meanwhile, the rest of the WrestleMania card was coming together. Andre the Giant would have one of his final big matches. Dusty Rhodes teamed with Sapphire to take on Randy Savage and Sherry. Roddy Piper faced Bad News Brown in a match that stirred up controversy when Piper painted half his body black. Even a young Diamond Dallas Page made an appearance, driving a fancy car to the ring. The show was loaded with talent and stories. But everyone knew the real attraction was the main event. WrestleMania VI took place on April 1st, 1990, and it delivered in ways that still echo today. The Sky Dome was packed, the energy was through the roof, and when Hogan and the Warrior finally stood across from each other in that ring, the crowd exploded with noise. This was it, the moment everyone had been waiting for. The match itself was a work of art. Both men had limits in the ring. Neither was known for having long, technical matches. But the people who put this match together understood that. They planned every moment to play to each man's strengths. The result was a battle that told a perfect story. Back and forth they went, each one hitting their biggest moves. The crowd did not know who to cheer for, and in the end, they cheered for both. The finish came when both men were exhausted. Hogan went for his famous leg drop, the move that had put away so many opponents. But the Warrior moved out of the way. Then, with all his remaining strength, the Warrior hit his big splash and pinned Hogan clean in the middle of the ring. It was Hogan's first clean pinfall loss since 1981. The arena went silent for a split second, then erupted. The torch had been passed. The Ultimate Warrior was the new champion. Readers of Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazine voted this match of the year. Future wrestling stars like Edge, Christian, Lance Storm, and even a young Renee Young were in the audience that night, watching as history was made. Edge, then just 16 years old, was sitting in the 11th row wearing a Hulk Hogan shirt. For these future stars, this moment would plant seeds that would grow into their own careers years later. WrestleMania VI proved that the WWE could pull off something no one thought possible. They made fans choose between two heroes, and it worked. After the match, Hogan did something that showed his class. He handed the title belt to the Warrior and raised his hand. Then he left the ring, giving the new champion his moment in the spotlight. It was a passing of the torch done right, or so everyone thought. The rest of WrestleMania VI had plenty of entertainment as well. Rick Rude and Jimmy Snuka had a solid match. The tag team bout between Demolition and the team of Andre the Giant and Haku showed that Andre could still draw a crowd, even as his body was breaking down from years of abuse. Rhythm and Blues performed their entrance with all the pageantry that was typical of this era. It was a show that felt like a celebration, a party to crown a new king. What many people forget about WrestleMania VI is the atmosphere in that building. The Sky Dome had never hosted wrestling before. The Canadian fans were eager to be part of history. They did not disappoint. From the opening bell to the final moment, they were loud and passionate. They made the show feel special in a way that only a great crowd can. The wrestlers fed off that energy, and it made everything better. Just 13 days after WrestleMania, something special happened in Tokyo, Japan. For the first and only time in history, Three major wrestling companies came together for one show. The WWE joined forces with New Japan Pro Wrestling and All Japan Pro Wrestling to create the Wrestling Summit. This was a big deal. These companies were usually rivals. Getting them in the same building was like getting cats and dogs to share a meal. The show featured dream matches that fans had long wanted to see. Bret Hart took on Tiger Mask 2 in a technical clash of styles that ended in a 20-minute time limit draw. Hulk Hogan faced Stan Hansen, a tough Texan who had become a legend in Japan. The crowd loved every minute of it. Readers of the Wrestling Observer newsletter, a publication that covered wrestling from around the world, voted this the best show of the year. Sadly, this would be the only time all three companies worked together. The rivalry between New Japan and All Japan ran too deep. Their leaders could not stand each other. Any future attempts at cooperation were doomed from the start. But for one night in April 1990, wrestling fans got to see what could have been. It was a glimpse of a world where companies put aside their differences for the greater good of the sport. With the title around his waist, the Ultimate Warrior should have been flying high. Instead, his reign as champion started to show problems almost right away. The first sign of trouble came when he was forced to give up the Intercontinental title just one day after WrestleMania. The WWE president at the time, a character named Jack Tunney, said that no one could hold two belts at once. So the Warrior had to drop the IC title, which was then won by Mr. Perfect in a tournament. Perfect defeated Tito Santana in the finals on the May 19th episode of Superstars. The new champion's first major program was with Rick Rude, a man he had fought the year before. Rude was a great villain with a body that looked like it was carved from stone. He knew how to make people hate him, and he could work a good match. On paper, this feud should have been money. Fans did not seem as invested as they should have been. Part of the problem was Hulk Hogan. Even though he had lost the title, Hogan never really went away. He took a short break to work on movies and do some shows in Japan, but he was back by summer. And when he returned, he jumped right into the main event scene with a feud against Earthquake, a massive man who had attacked him on a talk show. Suddenly, the Warrior was not the only hero fans were watching. He had to share the spotlight with the guy who was supposed to have passed him the torch. At SummerSlam in August, this problem was clear for all to see. The Warrior defended his title against Rude in a steel cage match. It was a good match, and the Warrior won. But on that same card, Hogan faced Earthquake in what many fans saw as the real main event. The old king still cast a long shadow over the new one. The cage match itself was well done. Steel cage matches have a different feel from regular matches. The cage surrounds the ring, trapping both men inside. There is no running away. There is no outside interference. It is just two competitors and the cold steel around them. Rude tried everything to win, using the cage as a weapon, trying to escape, doing all the dirty tricks a villain should do. But in the end, the Warrior was too strong. He climbed out of the cage and won the match. The problem was that this victory felt like it should have been the biggest moment of the night. Instead, it was overshadowed by what came after. The summer of 1990 brought many changes to the WWE roster. In July, some big names made their debuts. On July 15th, the Road Warriors, one of the most popular tag teams in wrestling history, arrived on Wrestling Challenge and were given the new name Legion of Doom. Less than 2 weeks later, on July 28th at Saturday night's main event, Kerry Von Erich, a beloved star from Texas, made his debut as the Texas Tornado. These additions gave the company fresh faces to work with. But not all the news was good. On July 4th, Brutus Beefcake, a close friend of Hulk Hogan, suffered a terrible accident. During a party in Florida, a parasailer's knees struck him in the face at high speed, shattering his facial bones. He needed over 16 hours of reconstructive surgery with titanium plates and would be out for the rest of the year and beyond. It was a scary reminder that danger can strike even outside the ring. SummerSlam itself was a solid show. The Texas Tornado won the Intercontinental title from Mr. Perfect in a short but exciting match. The Hart Foundation captured the tag team titles from Demolition. These were feel-good moments that gave fans new champions to root for. But in the main event picture, things remained stuck. The Warrior was still champion, but he did not feel like the top guy. A couple months after SummerSlam in October, Rick Rude left the company. The departure came down to pay and booking disputes. Rude felt he was not being compensated fairly for his contributions. Whatever the exact reasons, his leaving created a hole in the roster. The Warrior had lost one of his few worthy opponents at a time when he desperately needed strong challengers. Around this same time, Jesse Ventura also left his position as a commentator. He had been fighting with McMahon over royalties from home video sales. Ventura believed that if his voice was on a tape being sold, he should get paid for it. McMahon disagreed. The matter went to court, and Ventura won. But by then, he was gone from the company. The Ventura situation showed that even successful partnerships can fall apart over money. For years, Ventura had been one of the best commentators in wrestling. His voice was known to millions. He added something special to every broadcast he was part of. But when he felt he was not being paid fairly, he was willing to walk away. This willingness to stand up for himself would serve him well later in life, when he went into politics and eventually became governor of Minnesota. Wrestling was just one chapter in a remarkable life. Meanwhile, the mid-card was quietly producing some excellent work. Jake Roberts was in the middle of a feud with Rick Martel that told a simple but effective story. Martel had sprayed his cologne, arrogance, into Jake's eyes, temporarily blinding him. Jake was out for revenge, hunting Martel through the darkness that now surrounded him. The feud was not about titles or money. It was about hurt and payback. Those primal emotions resonated with fans in a way that more complicated stories sometimes did not. As the leaves changed color, the WWE faced a hard truth. The Ultimate Warrior experiment was not working. Attendance at house shows was down. Television ratings were flat. Merchandise sales were not where they needed to be. The magic that had seemed so bright at WrestleMania was fading fast. People have debated why this happened for years. Some point to the booking. After Rude left, the Warrior had no strong opponents. He feuded with the Big Boss Man, but that match had already been done. He faced other names on the house show circuit, but none of them felt like real threats. Without a great villain to fight, even the best hero can seem boring. Others blame Hogan's continued presence. How could the Warrior ever feel like the top guy when the old champion was still around, still main eventing, still getting the biggest reactions? It was like trying to be the lead singer while the guy who had the job before you is still on stage singing backup. The audience keeps looking at the old star, not the new one. And some people blame the Warrior himself. They say he was a one-trick pony. His entrance was amazing, but once the bell rang, he had limits. He could not carry a match the way Hogan could. He could not cut promos that made sense and built stories. He was difficult to work with backstage. He did not have the same drive to be the best that Hogan had shown for years. Whatever the cause, the result was clear. By fall, McMahon was already making plans to put the belt back on Hogan at the next WrestleMania. The great experiment had failed. But how would they get there? Originally, the plan was to have Tugboat, Hogan's tag team partner, turn on him and become the villain for the big match. Thankfully, fate had other ideas. Tugboat as a main event villain would have been a disaster. He was a large man with a friendly face who dressed like a sailor. Children liked him because he seemed harmless and fun. Turning him evil might have worked for a short time, but the idea of him as a world champion was hard to imagine. He simply did not have the presence or the skills to carry that weight. McMahon may have been desperate, but even he must have known this was not the best choice. He just did not have a better option at the moment. The house show circuit during this period tells its own story. Attendance was down compared to the previous year. The Warrior was doing his job, going from town to town, defending the title against whoever they put in front of him. But the crowds were smaller. The excitement was lower. Something had been lost since WrestleMania, and no one knew exactly how to get it back. The company was in a holding pattern, waiting for something to change. As 1990 moved toward its end, the real world crashed into the wrestling world. The Gulf War had begun, with American troops being sent to Iraq. This was a serious matter. People were dying. Families were scared. The whole country was on edge. And Vince McMahon saw an opportunity. His idea was to have Sergeant Slaughter, a man who had built his career as an American hero, turn traitor. The Sarge would become an Iraqi sympathizer, waving the flag of the enemy and praising their leader. It was a shocking turn. And it was also seen by many as being in very poor taste. How could a wrestling company use a real war where real people were dying as a storyline? The heat on Slaughter was real, too real. He received death threats. He had to travel with security guards. At some shows, he wore a bulletproof vest under his clothes. This was not normal wrestling heat where fans boo the bad guy, but no, it is all a show. This was genuine hatred born from genuine fear and anger about what was happening overseas. To build the character, Slaughter aligned himself with General Adnan, a manager who played up the Middle Eastern stereotype. They started feuding with Nikolai Volkov, who had himself been a Russian villain for years but was now an American hero. The irony was thick. A former Russian heel was now the good guy fighting a former American hero who had become the bad guy. Wrestling is strange sometimes. The angle would continue into 1991, with Slaughter eventually winning the WWE Championship from the Warrior. This set up the match McMahon really wanted, Hogan versus Slaughter at WrestleMania VII. But the controversy hurt the company. Ticket sales for that show were so low that they had to move from the massive Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum to a smaller arena. The gamble did not pay off. The 1990 Survivor Series took place on November 22nd and would go down in history for two very different debuts. One was a disaster. The other was the start of a legend. For weeks, the WWE had been teasing a giant egg that would hatch at the pay-per-view. They showed it on television, building mystery about what was inside. Fans speculated wildly. Some thought it might be a major star from another company, like Ric Flair or Sting. The anticipation was high. When the egg finally cracked open, out came a man in a turkey costume. His name was the Gobbledygooker, played by Hector Guerrero. The crowd went silent, then started to boo. Mean Gene, the interviewer, tried his best to make it work, dancing around the ring with the Turkey Man. But there was no saving this. It was one of the worst ideas in wrestling history, and McMahon knew it right away. The character was dropped almost immediately. But later that same night, something magical happened. The $1 Million Man was set to compete in a team match against Dusty Rhodes, the Hart Foundation, and Coco Beware. Before the match, he announced that he had found a mystery partner. This man was from Death Valley. He was brought to the ring by Brother Love. When the arena went dark and the funeral bells started to toll, fans had no idea what they were about to see. Then he walked through the curtain. The Undertaker. Even his name sent chills down spines. He moved slowly, his eyes rolled back in his head, looking like death itself had come to the arena. On commentary, Vince McMahon and Roddy Piper sold him like he was the devil-made flesh. Children hid behind their parents. Adults felt a strange sense of dread. This was something new, something different, something that would last for 30 years. No one that night could have known what The Undertaker would become. No one could have predicted that he would go on to have the most famous, undefeated streak in WrestleMania history, going 21-0 over 23 years before finally being defeated. No one could have guessed that he would hold the world title multiple times, that he would main event countless shows, that he would become perhaps the greatest character in wrestling history. All they knew was that when he walked into that arena, everything felt different. The future had arrived, even if it was dressed in black. The rest of the Survivor Series was solid enough. The Warriors team beat Mr. Perfect's squad, though the champion still felt like an afterthought. Hogan's group of heroes defeated the villains led by Earthquake. At the end of the night, they tried something new, a grand finale match where all the winners from earlier faced off. It was an interesting experiment, but it did not catch on with fans and was not repeated the following year. The Sergeant Slaughter angle also continued to build at this show. His team of mercenaries faced a group led by Nikolai Volkov, and even though Slaughter's side lost, the real story was how much heat he was getting. Every time he appeared on screen, fans booed with genuine anger. This was not the usual wrestling booing where everyone is having fun. This was real hatred born from real fear about a real war. McMahon had found the villain he wanted, even if the path to getting there was morally questionable. Looking at the full card of the 1990 Survivor Series, you can see both the strengths and weaknesses of the WWE at this time. The star power was real. Hogan, Warrior, Mr. Perfect, Savage, The Million Dollar Man, Rhodes, the Harts. These were names that meant something, but the creative direction was confused. The main event scene was a mess. The undercard had good workers but often lacked compelling story. The company was in transition, and it showed. As 1990 drew to a close, the WWE found itself in a strange position. The torch that had been passed at Wrestlemania was being pulled back. The Warrior was still champion on paper, but everyone knew his days at the top were numbered. Sergeant Slaughter was building toward a title match. Hulk Hogan was waiting in the wings. The next year would see things return to the way they had been before. Mr. Perfect ended the year as Intercontinental Champion, having won the belt back from the Texas Tornado. The Hart Foundation held the tag team titles after a strange situation where the Rockers had actually won the belts on October 30th in Fort Wayne, Indiana. But the match was erased from the record books because the top rope broke during the match. The footage was not released until 2007. These title situations showed that even below the main event, there was instability. One thing worth noting is who was rising through the midcard. Bret Hart was starting to get singles matches and showing that he could be more than just a tag team guy. Shawn Michaels, despite missing time with a knee injury, was being groomed for bigger things as part of the Rockers. These two men would go on to lead the WWE through the next decade. The foundation for the new generation was being laid even as the Hulkamania era stumbled. The women's division, meanwhile, had been shut down entirely. McMahon deactivated the Women's Championship in February, declaring that there was no interest in women's wrestling anymore. Rockin' Robin was the last champion of that era, and she still has the original belt to this day. The title would not be revived until December 1993 when Alundra Blaze brought it back. This was a dark time for female wrestlers who had worked hard to build their craft. They were told their efforts did not matter. History would prove McMahon wrong on this point, but that correction was still years away. The decision to end women's wrestling reflected the thinking of the time. McMahon believed that fans only wanted to see men compete. The women's matches were treated as bathroom breaks, filler material while the crowd waited for the men to return. This was wrong, but it would take decades for the industry to fully recognize how wrong it was. The women who wrestled in 1990 deserve credit for keeping the tradition alive, even when no one was paying attention. December 1990 was a month of setting up what would come next. Slaughter continued his feud with the Warrior, building toward their title match. Hogan was kept busy with Earthquake and his allies. The midcard continued to produce solid work that would pay off in future years. The year ended not with a bang, but with a sense of anticipation. Something big was coming. The pieces were moving into place. But for now, the fans would have to wait and wonder what 1991 would bring. Looking back, 1990 was a year of lessons for the WWE. The biggest lesson was that you cannot force a torch to be passed. Fans will accept who they accept, not who you tell them to accept. The Ultimate Warrior had all the tools to be a top star: the look, the energy, the merchandise sales. But when put in the main event spotlight for an extended period, something was missing. The magic was not there. Some have argued that the Warrior was never given a fair chance. With Hogan lingering in the main event picture and a weak roster of opponents to face, how could anyone succeed? Others say that the Warrior's own personality and work habits doomed him. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Success in wrestling requires many things to go right at once. In 1990, not enough things went right for the Warrior. But failure is not always total. Even though the Warrior experiment did not work, the year gave us many memorable moments. The WrestleMania VI main event remains one of the most beloved matches in history. The Wrestling Summit showed what could happen when companies cooperate, and the debut of The Undertaker planted a seed that would grow into one of the greatest careers ever. The year also marked the beginning of the end for the Hulkamania era. The steroids that had helped build so many of these larger-than-life bodies would soon become a scandal. Federal investigators were already looking into the wrestling industry. Within a few years, many of the top names from this era would be gone, either by choice or by necessity. The WWE would have to reinvent itself or die. WWE in 1990 tried to do something bold, and it did not work out the way they planned. But sometimes the most interesting stories are the ones where things go wrong. The attempt to make the Warrior the new face of wrestling teaches us about the complexity of stardom. The debut of The Undertaker shows us that greatness can appear when you least expect it. The overall direction of the company reveals how difficult it is to let go of what works, even when you know change is needed. For fans who lived through this era, 1990 holds a special place in memory. It was the last year before the scandals hit. It was the final chapter of the innocent Hulkamania days. After this, wrestling would become more complicated, more controversial, and eventually more popular than ever before. Like and subscribe for 100 years of luck. Until next time.